So, I don't know if anyone's ever going to read this, but I feel like I need to get my story out there. When I tell people this story, they just brush it off and say, "Oh wow, that's creepy." But this event really took a toll on me. Anyway, this is a completely true story. I'll start it off with a little introduction. Hi, my name's Chloe. I'm 17, and 2 summers ago, when I was 15, 16, I worked at an average sleepaway summer camp. I never went to the camp when I was a kid, but I did some first aid lifeguard training at it a year prior to being a counselor there. I loved it. That's why I decided to work there, get all of my volunteer hours, and spend my whole summer there. Well, 4 weeks to be exact. It was right on the water, and I thought it was going to be nice. Well, I was wrong. Very wrong. Everything was okay, and absolutely normal until my last week. So, the last week I worked was a senior girls' week, meaning girls aged 11 to 14 could attend, and all of the counselors were female. I had a cabin of 5 girls, 2 of which were total brats, so most of my time was delegated to them. All these girls were 11 or 12. Now, the first 2 days of camp were fairly normal. I had a few homesick campers at bedtime, but with some positive reassurance, I got them to sleep. Homesickness with kids is only ever usually a problem at night, specifically the first few nights, as the kids adjust from being away from home. That's why I was so surprised. One of the most independent girls in my cabin, who's also one of my favorites, woke me up by standing in front of me and waiting for me to wake up. Creepy, right? On the 3rd night, actually. She tells me that she thinks there's somebody outside and that she wants to go home. This camp was on an island surrounded by thick forest. I told her it was probably just an animal. There were notorious deer and raccoons at the camp very often, and with some reassurance, I got her to go back to bed. Now, I didn't think twice about this. Having worked 3 weeks already, it was pretty common, honestly. Now, this is where things start getting weird. The next night, so night 4, she does the same thing to wake me up. She tells me that she has to go to the bathroom, which was a bit of a walk away from our cabin. I got with her, obviously, and once we're in the bathroom in the light, it was pretty clear to me that she had wet herself. So I asked her about it, and she said it was just an accident. Alright, I had no problems with this. I let her get herself cleaned up and went to get one of the camp leaders, wondering what I should do about the girl's sleeping bag. So, the camp leader, her name was Elmo. Everyone at the camp had code names. Something fun for the kids, I guess. The girl in question's name is Karen. I don't know why I haven't mentioned that yet. So, Elmo starts asking this girl some questions, since we're all still in the bathroom. I assume it was because this girl was 11, which is kind of old to be peeing the bed, especially when she was so independent thus far in the week, and never had a problem going to the bathroom herself before. So, Elmo asked Karen and answered that it was because she was scared. She was too scared to move or get out of her sleeping bag. Elmo asked what she was afraid of, and she said, the man. Now, I was standing over on the side, listening and chiming in here or there. I'm a believer in ghosts, openly, but at this moment, I could admit that I did not think of anything like this. The things kids come up with, especially having worked with kids for 3 weeks, I wasn't really fazed. Elmo had asked her which man she was referring to, and she couldn't seem to name him, but she described him, and this description is terrifying. Elmo asked if he was tall, and she said no. He was average height. Elmo kept trying to joke around with this girl, I guess to try and make her fears less scary, but this girl was not having that shit. It's like she was trying to warn us for real, just how she spoke. Anyway, she tells us over a long period of Q&A that this demon is average height and not nice. He's a man, but not human. She said that he had been following her and her brother for a long time. She told us that one day she was playing in the forest at her grandparents' house, and that's when she met him. He scared her, and she ran away from him. She said he always followed her, and he always was with her when she slept at different places. Honest to God, I should have seen all the red flags all over it, but I didn't. I was tired and it sounded like a kid's nightmare, after watching a horror movie or something. After all, my leader Elmo got this girl to calm down, and she was crying as she told us this, and got her back to be with new sheets and blankets and stuff. And she told Karen that our repair guy, Shank, was going to do some ghost busting for her in the morning, and that everything would be okay. Blah blah. The next morning at the counselor's meeting, before all the kids are up, I told my counselor friends about this. I didn't tell all the counselors, just my close personal friends. I didn't want this, what I believed to be funny ghost story, to get out to the kids, because that wouldn't be good. Kids take things seriously, and I didn't think anything of it. We all laughed about it and shrugged it off, vowed not to tell anyone else what this girl had said. Well, just as I wrapped up that story to them, this other counselor girl named Ace walks into the break room. We didn't like Ace. She was honestly just a crab. But we make small talk anyway. Then she tells us something that had my whole group shook. Ace tells us that later last night, 2 girls from her cabin, age 13, went out to the bathroom together. As they were coming back from the bathroom, the 2 campers started to freak out and run. They felt like something was following them. They were both crying apparently when they got back to Ace's cabin, and Ace had to calm them down, but got them back to sleep eventually. Now, that was weird. My friend group and I decided not to tell Ace about my situation, because she had a big mouth, and was probably going to start something around the camp, which we were all trying to avoid. Well, the rest of the day went by fine. Completely normal, actually. Near the end of the day, after the campfire, Shank, who is the repair guy, whom also happens to be an actual ordained minister, invited me and Elmo and Karen into the kitchen, and he blesses this big bag of salt for us. Now, he was doing this mostly as a comfort for Karen, and like a joke thing that you would do for a kid just to give them reassurance. But Shank told me to be careful anyway. He didn't like the way the situation was feeling. I just laughed and brushed him off. We spread the salt, doorway, and windows, making a line of salt so demons couldn't enter. Well, I thought this would solve our little foolish problem, right? Wrong. Kieran pulls me aside before bedtime and looks up at me with the saddest face I've ever seen on a child ever. And all she says is, "Ink," which is my code name. "This isn't going to work. I appreciate it a lot, but the demon, he likes salt. He's going to come for it." If that wasn't a perfect quote, it was something along those lines. Main point is though, our new demon friend likes salt. It was at this moment that everything hit me. I don't know why, but I started having a panic attack. I didn't let the kids see this though. I told Karen just to try and get some rest, and I slipped out and ran to the kitchen in tears. I begged Shank to let me sleep in the break room and have one of the senior staff members take my cabin over for the night. He hugged me as I cried. I was so freaked out all of a sudden, and I don't know why it had hit me all at once. I was so overrun by sheer terror, which I have never felt before or since. I felt as though something very bad was going to happen. Shank gave me another bag of blessed salt to keep with me. This is all true. I can't make this up. And told me I had to sleep in that cabin. I had to protect those kids, and that it was God's plan for me, he said. Reflection on this, I think he was horrified and just messing with me. But I was horrified. I listened though. I clutched my flashlight and the bag of salt as I tried to sleep that night. But I still had this ominous, horrific feeling of fear and death looming over me. It was so creepy. I should note that this cabin was just a small room with 4 sets of bunk beds, 2 on either side of the room, and 2 windows, one at the back if you're facing inwards the door, and one directly next to me. Directly outside the back window, there was this big tree, so there wasn't much of a view, but you could clearly see out of mine. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m., and there were no phones allowed or any clocks in the cabin, so I had nothing to tell time, or to stare at except the surrounding darkness. This is when things really hit the fan. All the girls in my cabin, completely asleep, all inhale a deep breath at the same time and exhale the word, "Ink," which is my code name, so I whisper back, "Are you girls awake?" And I get nothing. After a few minutes of being absolutely petrified, I hear their normal snoring again, and shuffling sleeping sounds begin. That wasn't the end of the creepiness of this night for me. Oh no. Next, a while later, I hear the door creak open. There was an outside screen and an inside actual door. I had both doors closed. I hear the outer on creaking. I become alert immediately, adrenaline coursing through me. I'm looking out my window and at the door, trying to see anything in the pitch blackness, when I see a black flash to my right. I look over and I see this entirely black being leaning over one of my girls in the bottom bunk across from me. And as soon as I notice it, I see it reaching for this girl's face. I flicked my flashlight on and gripped the bag of salt, and I said, "God loves me, God loves me, God loves me," over and over again. I see this black mass dart towards the door, and the door just opens, the inner door. It opens up wide, and I believe the demon had left. I still felt absolutely freaked out, but I didn't feel the same weight of terror as before. I didn't sleep a wink that night, and as soon as I saw the sun start to come up from my window, I darted up and over to my good friend Marco's cabin. Before I can tell her anything of what I just saw, she tells me that she was woken up in the middle of the night by someone or something breathing heavily outside of her window next to her bed. But when she got up to check it out, thinking it was a kid or something, all she saw was a dark figure turning and going into the bushes, and she didn't see anything else. She brushed it off as a deer, probably. We went for an early morning shower, and I told her everything. That's not the end though, even though that was my last night, and this was not the day we were supposed to leave. Marco and I were in the break room, waiting for the other to wake up and join us for a morning meeting. Ace comes in and tells us something that made my blood run cold. Despite the fact that I had calmed down from the night's terror, I felt oddly peaceful. She said that she had looked out her window before bed, around midnight, when the moon and stars were lighting shit up. And she said that she saw a black figure that looked like a person leaning against a tree behind my cabin, looking in the window. Might I mention where she was describing to have seen the figure looking would have been directly facing Karen's bed in our cabin. At this point, I decided to tell Ace about everything. I told everyone. There was too much substantial proof for them to not believe what I was telling them, which was the truth. Ace never knew about what Karen told me in Elmo, and my experience with the demon, and yet she had two experiences of her own, with her girls being followed and seeing something looking into my cabin, what seemed to match the descriptions. And Elmo was there when Karen was telling us the story of the same demon. When I got home from my week, I vowed to never go back to that camp. Yet I felt oddly safe. It didn't feel like the demon had followed me at all. I felt so oddly calm and peaceful in the following days. I told one of my friends who often has spiritual encounters and asked what he thought, and he told me something that creeped me out. He told me that when I was at camp, the same night I had the encounter with the demon, a spirit told him or showed him or something that I was in grave danger, and he said that he was praying for me that night repeatedly because he felt a connection to me and that something really bad was going on. He was so shocked to hear my story when I told him. He was positive that I had encountered some kind of demon that had latched itself onto this girl. I'm still freaked out to my experience. This was a true story, and no part of it was made up or exaggerated. If you actually heard all this, let me know what you think. I don't know a lot about the paranormal, honestly, and it scares me, especially now. But please tell me what you think, and if this is something that you think was my imagination or not. I hoped it was, but when I got up in the morning, the door I know that had closed the night before was still open after I saw the figure open it and dart out. February 2016. I heard my dog barking and growling right around 3 a.m. one night. I got up and went to our back door to see what she was barking at. When I did, I saw her running up and down the backyard fence line, barking, growling, and urinating all along the fence with her tail tucked in. My first thought was predator. I knew something was wrong. I focused my eyes to see if I could see what she was barking at and whispered, "Holy shit." I saw something bent over in a circle that was black and looked like it had a mane, like a lion. I looked at it for about 15 seconds and decided to run to the bedroom and get my head wrapped light. I put it on my head and ran to the back den and saw that it was still there. I carefully turned on the light and shined it right on it. When I did, it turned around and looked right in my direction. Then, it ran down the fence line with a smaller one in front of it. The best way I can describe it would be to say that it was the size of a lion. It had yellow eyes, pointed ears, huge shoulders, and a huge chest. It ran on all fours. Also, this thing was so fast that it only took about 2 seconds to run down the entire fence line. This wolf was way faster than my dog. I woke up my wife and told her what had just happened. Then, we went to the computer and Googled huge wolves in America. Under images, I found a cartoon of a drawing that somebody did, and its head and mane looked just like what I saw. It was called a Dogman. Today is April 25th, 2016. I will start with this, that my uncle had always told me and my father about what he called the monkey people, and I thought he was BSing. On the second weekend in October 1976, first day of bird hunting season, I had stopped in the morning and set 4 catfish lines on a river where it joined my uncle's land, which was 2 miles away on U.S. Highway 82 East. This area is known as the Little Lot by local old-timers. After I had finished hunting at just about dark, 7 p.m. or so, I stopped back to see if I had any catfish. This is on a winding private dirt road, at least 1.5 miles from my uncle's home. I had left my gun in the truck and had only my pocket knife to cut the lines. As I worked with the lines, I'd heard a sound I had never heard before, very deep, very loud breathing. And then I smelt a strange smell. The smell made me feel uneasy. I was unable to see anything, but as I backed towards the truck, it moved out into a clearing, and I was able to see it from about 10 feet away. At around 6 foot tall, it looked wet, as if it had just come from the river. It also had green river scum on its left leg and side. It stopped dead, still, when it seen me, and I wasted no time getting out of there. Okay, so this is a long story, so I'll try and get it as easy as I can. When I was around 14 years old, my family, which is my mom, dad, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters, traveled into the north side of Apex Park in South Australia. It's a huge park, tennis court, and nature reserve sort of thing behind it, with a river running into a little lake there, to visit some extended family for lunch. At this age, I struggled heavily with depression, so I enjoyed wandering off with my headphones and to explore and get lost in my imagination. I had walked along the little boardwalk that gets you across the river and into the nature part of the park area. It was a long dirt crossroad with huge dead trees in the middle, surrounded by scrub. I was wandering down the track, listening to music, when a tall, well-dressed man in a blue shirt stepped out, completely clean, mind you, from where the swampy marsh was. I stopped and took my headphones out to tell him he scared me, and he apologized before smiling and walking the other way. I thought nothing of it at first, but was kind of suspicious of how clean he was. I continued down the path till I got to a bridge and a water plant. I figured if it went too far, I'd be out of reach for my family, and that guy was still at the back of my mind, so I turned around and began to go back towards my parents. Because of the dirt, I was at an angle so I could see ahead before whatever was ahead could see me. Standing in front of the dead crossroads tree was the guy in the blue shirt talking to a really dirty-looking short guy and pointing in my direction. Alarm bells went off in my mind, so I hid behind a tree and watched the guy wander down a trail next to the one I just went down, looking around in the bushes and stuff. I scanned the area for the original guy, but he was just gone, like nowhere to be seen. So I ducked around the tree and hunched as I ran past the trail opening and sped walking to the dead tree. I stood there for a second, scanning again for the guy, but I couldn't see him. There weren't even shoe prints in the mud at the base of the tree. The other side of the crossroads led to a little bit of scrub and then houses. The houses had huge 6 to 7 feet tall wooden fences, but the trees behind them were pretty. So instead of running back to my family like I should have, my dumbass wandered over about 5 feet away from the fence to take photos. This is where the crawler comes in. I'm not sure if it was this creature, but after excessive scouring of the internet, this is what matches most. Everything went silent. No bugs, no birds, no horses from the neighboring paddocks. Even the wind had stopped. Then I heard what sounded like a fly screen door opening and shutting, and then silence for about 10 seconds. I continued to take photos until I saw something pale gray move in the corner of my eye. I turned to watch huge hands with long, skinny fingers fold over the fence slowly. The head of a hairless, bone-skinny, tall-as-hell creature peek over to look at me. It only peeked over about half its head, but I didn't look like it had a nose, and its eyes were a huge glowing white-yellow color. It stared at me as I stood there frozen for what felt like forever, but in reality was probably only 5 or 10 seconds before its head snapped to the side. I turned my head to see what it was looking at, and the original guy was about 4 feet away from me. I turned and sped, walked toward the tree, temporarily glancing down at my phone for 3 seconds before looking up to see him charging toward me. Not running, but obviously striding in an effort to catch up with me. I stayed calm and sped walked across the boardwalk. I didn't run because he was bigger than me, and if I let on that, I knew, and started running, he would have caught me or pushed me into the lake. I only started sprinting when I could see my family and I heard him start to run behind me. After I got back to my family, my aunt told me that the guy had been circling us all since we got there and was watching me for at least 2 hours before it happened. To this day, I've never been able to explain what I saw or what it was. I just know that if I didn't or hadn't seen it, the guy walking toward me, I don't think I would have been able to get away. Basically, I was taking photos of the trees when I saw a gray, hairless creature with huge glowing eyes staring at me over a fence. It turned its head and alerted me to a guy that I'm 99% sure was trying to abduct me. I haven't told this too often, but this is exactly what had happened. This was in Georgia. I was 10 or maybe 11 years old. 1956 to 1957. My house was on a main highway with some homes scattered behind it, and then miles of woods. My friend and I had been at a creek in the woods behind my house, maybe 3/4 a mile from my house. It was getting dark, summer, and we were heading home. I was almost home. House was 100 yards away. Not scared, almost home. Never had heard of Bigfoot. There was a gully to our right, with a trail in the shallow end of the gully we used as a path. I heard a loud clomping sound coming toward us on the other side of the gully, swishing through the small pines coming down the path toward us. I thought it was a mule that had gotten out, and I would try to catch it. This is how loud it sounded as it came toward us. When it came up on our side of the gully, I saw a large, ape-man-like hairy creature jogging toward us on the path on 2 legs. Needless to say, my friend and I didn't stay around for an extended look, maybe 2 to 3 seconds of observation. Then, we took off. The creature was probably close to 6 to 7 feet tall. It looked like that video, the Patterson and Gimlin film. When we told our parents and playmates, we were the subject of much ridicule. That is, until about a week or so later, when 5 or so of them were down at the creek damming it up. I wasn't with them, as I no longer played in the woods. Well, they saw the thing, and this was in the middle of the day. As they came running out of the woods, some of them crying, they were so shaken. Their parents called the sheriff, and he said it was probably just a bear. It wasn't. It was no hoax with somebody in a suit. I was down at a place we call the Clay Hills outside of a town called Hoboken. I had heard a noise that sounded like footsteps in the woods. I didn't think much of it at first, but I kept hearing it, so I looked up at it and it was looking at me. I moved the shovel I was digging with, and it turned and ran back into the woods. Then a few minutes later, and I had a weird feeling something was behind me. Then I heard movement. I turned and looked, and it was much more behind me and getting closer. I have lived in the swamps all of my life. I'm not scared of much, but I admit I was nervous. It watched me for a while, and then walked into the swamp and disappeared. Both times was close to fruit during the fall when the plums and pears were the sweetest. The second time was one night I was coming home from my girlfriend's. I passed the cornfield on my left. A little further up, there is another field that was grown up with briars so thick that a man could not go through with 4 pairs of pants on, but something stood up and ran through them like they weren't even there. The next day I went back looking for prints, and I found one print. It was about 6 inches longer than mine, and I wear a size 12. Last December in Brooks County, Georgia, in the early hours of the morning, I was driving home to Florida on Claytonville Road. I was approaching the longest bridge between Rocky Ford Road and Route 53. I saw something that looked very tall, well, like a very tall man standing near the side of the bridge. I had my bright lights on, so I flashed my lights to warn this pedestrian at this hour that I was approaching. I then tapped the horn, but this very large figure didn't run. It appeared as I drew closer to be reaching for something beyond the bridge, perhaps leaves of the trees. I began to slow down as I approached the bridge, fearing this very big man was drunk and would stagger in front of my car. But as I approached the object, I saw this was either a giant of a man in a shaggy fur coat, or a huge animal that I had never seen. It was standing on 2 feet, and its arms were long. This I noticed as it turned its head toward the car. It dropped one arm to its side. I can't describe its face because I was scared, nearly too, because as it turned its head, my lights reflected in its eye, and it glowed red instead of green or yellow, as I am used to seeing from animals I had viewed at night on the road. I was scared so badly, I raced home, but didn't mention this until weeks later to even my husband, because I was trying to rationalize this in my mind as fatigue, night illusions, whatever I could label it. Besides, I was afraid of being told I was crazy. I am a professional that needs to remain sane in the public's eye. I would very much like to get some feedback on this, but I positively do not want my name or profile mentioned on the internet. I am willing to work with anyone that is serious about finding what this is, but I must maintain a low public profile, because not only am I a professional, but I am a woman. But I am not a crazy woman. I know positively what I saw. September 13th, 2013. Before I say anything about my encounter, I just want to clarify that when I saw this thing, I went to Google and searched up what it was. I came across this website and found that another person in Jackson County had an encounter with something like this, so I know I'm not crazy. I'd been studying wolves and their behavior for about 3 years before I had this encounter, and I know that considering Jackson County is about 656 square miles with a population of around 675,000, and it being practically infested with wildlife such as deer, livestock, and predators such as coyotes and foxes, it wouldn't be likely for a large predator such as a wolf to be lurking in the sparse woodlands. The average wolf territory is around 13 to 2,400 square miles, and it'd be easy for such a huge creature to live just in Jackson County alone. This may be even the very same dog-wolf-man thing that the other person saw. Anyway, on to the encounter. I was just chilling on the laptop in the living room, watching people blow stuff up, when I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I set the laptop down and put my headphones on the keyboard and go out of the chair. Let me clarify. I'm not a bloody psychic or a medium or anything. but I have a sort of sixth sense to where I can tell if something is watching me, and I knew something was. We have a huge window on the wall just above the couch, and it was on a particularly cold night, so the windows caught things like breath fairly well. I turned to the window, thinking that whatever it was watching me from there, and I knew I'd see it if it was, since we have motion-sensing floodlights, and it'd have to be either standing on something or tall as the devil himself in order to see into the window of our trailer, since it was around 6 to 8 feet off the ground, with the top of it being about 11 feet. I looked over the window, and the only thing I could see was the floodlights were on and something seemed to duck under the window, like a kid playing hide and seek. I didn't think anything of it, considering our neighbors were a sort of druggy and alcoholic kind of family, and often came to look in our windows, and every opening to the house was locked. Because of this, I had nothing to worry about. I went to the bathroom, and when I had finished, I washed my hands and went back to the laptop. I noticed that the floodlights went out, so whatever it was gone. Not thinking anything else of it, I went back to watching people blow stuff up. I should mention also that my eyes are sharp enough to spot a bird about 50 feet away in a tree, so it's no surprise that when the floodlight came back on, I noticed it immediately. I glanced up from the screen, expecting a drunken or high idiot to be looking in with a stupid expression on his face, but I was frozen by what I saw. It was a huge wolf that was looking at me with dirty, ambery yellow eyes. Its ears looked like they were torn or cropped or something, and the face looked somewhat human. Not really a full human face, but more like the jawline looked very masculine and the human compared to the rest of its face. Its lips were curled back, and it seemed as if it were snarling, though I couldn't hear if it was, and its breath caught on the cold glass. It was so tall that the top of its head was halfway up the window, and if I had to guess how wide it was, I'd probably say maybe the width of my shoulders. I knew that whatever it was, it most likely had wolf instincts, so I did the only thing I knew to do, which was avoid eye contact and make yourself look as small as possible as you could, whilst having your throat and underside showing. This is a very common submissive position, and although I was scared out of my mind, I knew that holding eye contact would make it seem like a challenger, and running would make me seem like prey. When I did the submissive position, it must have worked for it to leave me alone because it just hit the window, which made the entire trailer shake, and it went away. I hadn't heard or seen anything else like it since, although I do hear the odd howl coming from the back roads. God help the poor idiot that decides to try and hunt this thing down. I can tell you now that whatever it was not friendly, because if it were, it wouldn't have slammed my window as hard as it had, and it would not have been growling like I'd taken its food. Although it practically did assault my window, I could understand why it was upset. I was on its territory, after all, an intruder and possibly a threat to its existence and its prey. It's really just best to stay out of its way and respect it. After all, it is one of God's many strange creatures in the world. I'm not exactly sure when this was, but I believe I was 5 or 6. I was laying in my bed at night, all tucked in and everything. One of my arms was on one side. The other hand was against the other wall. I felt a hand slide into mine, like as if it were holding my hand. I didn't think it was very scary, honestly. It was a little comforting at first, and I thought it was my mom who came to my room and was holding my hand. I opened my eyes, and then no one was in the room other than me, and I realized the hand was against the wall. I started shrieking after that and yelling for my parents. Eventually, they came, and the feeling of the hand went away. My mom believed it was a demon, and I didn't know what it was, but after that, I always wore socks to bed so it wouldn't touch my feet. I've had 3 other experiences, and my sister has had a lot more, but I always wondered if that was one actually a demon, or what do you guys think? I'd like to know if anyone else has had similar encounters like I did. I just read a similar post, so I feel like this is a pretty common encounter. My boyfriend at the time and I went to Key West in 2014 for vacation back in my junior year of college. Doing some bar hopping, we went into the main strip's Coyote Ugly bar. I ended up sitting next to this very thin, dark-haired woman. I asked her if it's alright if I sat there. She turns her head to be in an incredibly slow manner. She nods her head up and down, equally slow. I don't think anything of it. My boyfriend and I order a drink, and we're talking amongst ourselves for a minute. I'm facing away from the woman, and I feel her tap on my shoulder. So I turn around and she's raising her glass to me to cheers. I should explain what she looks like, because it's a lot like what I imagine a demon wearing human skin would look like. Bone thin, shallow skin, stringy black straight hair with sharp cheekbones and nose. Her eyes were black. I mean huge black pupils that didn't blink. They looked like static. She cheers me and opens her mouth to smile, and her gums are gray. Her teeth are gray and small, and I remember immediately having this overwhelming feeling that she wanted to eat my skin. I'm in pretty much panic mode at this point and whip my head back to my boyfriend. He's seen this woman now too, and he grabs me by the arm to get us to move to the back of the room as quickly as possible. I'm basically cowering. I know, super brave. Always loved reading about demons and possibly faced with one, I'm jello. Facing the back wall, I turn to start making our way out to the street, and the woman has got her head completely cranked around to stare at me from the bar. I feel her staring at me as we leave, and I haul ass back to the hotel. She didn't say a single word throughout the entire encounter, and I always regretted not asking her to speak. I will say, my boyfriend and I talked about it after and considered the gray teeth and mouth and general craziness, possibly due to drugs. But I've seen my fair share of drug addicts. Even one tried to kidnap me, and this was not the same. I think about this episode pretty often, even years later. That feeling of encountering something soulless that wanted to harm me has never diminished. My dog typically sleeps right around my arm. His head rests on my shoulder, so he is facing the window. When I sleep, the back of my head faces the window. Anyway, it was just nearing 5:30 a.m., and the dog wakes me up with extremely aggressive growling at the window. This growling I've only ever heard when he fights with other dogs. I was roused and I tried to coo him back to sleep. Within a couple of seconds, the growling turned into howls and barks. I looked outside the window and my heart rate shot through the roof. The property line from my house to my neighbors is 60 to 70 yards. I completed its state for track for the 100 open, 400, and 2 relays, so I can confirm this creature's speed was shocking. It covered the yard in no less than 3 seconds. Gray skin, long arms, almost down to its knees, an elongated face and anorexic-looking legs. It ran by swinging its arms like a buffoon, not a runner's form. After collecting myself, I burst into my dad's room. I startled him, but told him to get outside with me. We briskly got outside with handguns as I tried to explain what I saw. There were no footprints or marks, as white-tailed deer are frequently in our yard. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there is a stretch of road between me and my girlfriend's house that goes through some ranches and a wooded area. My girlfriend and I were driving back towards my house around 10 p.m., and while I was rounding a corner near the beginning of the woods, I swerved as I saw what looked like a tall, skinny, pale person standing there by the side of the road and walking into the road. When I looked in my rear to see what it was, I couldn't see anything. But after I asked my girlfriend about it, she was clearly shaken and said that she saw it too. We decided to stop talking about it for the time being and continue to drive deeper into the woods back home. About 15 minutes down the road, we come across a fresh deer carcass on the side of the road, and while I noticed the deer carcass alone as I was focusing on the narrow road, my girlfriend swears she saw the same figure bent over the carcass. I drove by that carcass for weeks after when I went back to her house. We've both seen a lot of weird stuff on that small stretch of road, including more on that specific drive, but nothing else that I think would have been a crawler. I'm not sure where it would have come from. No caves I'm aware of or around, or if it was more than one out there. But I know to always be aware of what else is on that road with me late at night. I was in South Georgia at a hunting camp I just joined that year. I was leaving the campsite and driving through the planted pines, maintained dirt roads to go to my stand. Directly behind camp is approximately 50 acres that no one is allowed to hunt for safety purposes. There is also a small pond in this area. Driving about a quarter mile from camp, I looked to my left in the pines and noticed something black. I was approaching an intersection, so I slowed to see what would emerge from the woods. To my surprise, a black animal came out of the woods on all fours, angled 45 degrees away from me. I tried to convince myself I was just seeing a bear, or possibly a cow that had gotten loose. However, as I watched from 50 feet, I noticed the complete absence of a tail. I watched the animal on open road in broad daylight for 10 seconds. It came directly out of the woods and ran down the road, and then crossed into the opposing woods and disappeared. I could see that the rear legs appeared to be longer than the front, and the head was closer to the ground. Also, as it ran on all fours, the animal loped, with the slope of the back changing rather than remaining level, as if the front was bouncing. Further, the legs and rear were much too thin to be that of a bear. Though I did not see the face, from the limited sight of the head, there was no clear visible ears. A bear's ears would be clearly visible. I immediately thought of Sasquatch. However, I was seeing an animal running on all fours. I have just seen the Jacobs photo, and that is the best way I can describe what I saw in South Georgia. Okay, I've gave it a lot of thought, and I will not give the exact location. I have lived here my whole life, close to 50 years, so most of the locals know who I am. But I will say it is in Chattooga County, Georgia, just a little north of Floyd County. I will leave for work before daylight. I live way out in the sticks, as some folks say. I hadn't been a mile or so from home when my headlights caught something. I first took to be some idiot in a monkey suit. But then I thought, why on earth would anyone do that, out here in the middle of nowhere, before daylight? I would guess within 20 feet of it. My mind was trying to get some realistic answer. It wasn't a bear. This thing stood, I would guess 7 to 8 feet high. This thing stood upright just like you and me do. It stopped in the middle of the road, and I stopped to keep from hitting it. Still unsure of what it was, I got a very good look at it. What was it? I don't know. What I saw looked just like a big, huge monkey walking upright just like you and me do. Will some people say I'm crazy? Sure they will. That's okay. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't been the one that had seen it. Me and my girlfriend were returning home in the early morning hours, around 3 a.m., on the date of June 28, 2009. I play lead guitar in a well-known band in the Atlanta area. For this reason, it's late when I do come home. We live in an area that is very rural with lots of farming land, and needless to say, we are surrounded by woods. On this particular night, we were less than half a mile from home. We were traveling past a pasture when I saw a figure cross the road in front of me. My girlfriend also seen it and asked me if I had saw it. I told her yes, but that was the last we spoke of it until later that day. We started describing to each other what we had seen, and the first thing I told her that it looked to me like it had reddish-colored hair. Then I said to her that I didn't want her to think I was crazy, but it looked to me like it was walking on 2 legs, not 4. As I said this to her, I could see that she was shocked by what I had told her. Then I asked her what she had seen. She had seen the same thing and even told me that whatever it was had reddish eyes. We saw a creature that stood about 6 feet tall and moved rapidly from the left to the right side of the road. We have only lived in this house for about a month, and we keep hearing what sounds like something walking in the woods behind our house. Our neighbors say that it's a deer. What we hear late at night sounds like footsteps of a person, something bipedal, and not an animal. This happened a couple years ago. I'm posting this now because I only just found out that anything called a crawler exists. I'm skeptical of most things, but when recounting these events, I usually refer to it as my Bigfoot story because it was always the closest thing that came to mind. Anyway, this was a couple years ago in southern Indiana near Evansville. It was 2 a.m. and my friend and I decided to go for a joyride. This would have been in the fall, so maybe near September or October. I can pin the date to the time of year because I live around a bunch of fields and the corn stalks were very high. I'd say approaching 10 feet. We were just driving around when I decided to turn on this old country road because it led to the local animal shelter. I had never seen the shelter before, and I wanted to see what it looked like. Yes, this is the kind of stuff I do on joyrides. Both me and my friend were completely sober. The road ended up being much longer and roundabout than I anticipated, and we basically drove through a bunch of farmland. We were listening to music, and I was driving pretty slow. We got to a long road surrounded by corn stalks when I heard my friend yell out, "Holy shit!" I put on my brakes and asked him what was up, and he looked over to my left. I'll describe what I saw as well as I can. Hovering above the top of stalks was the top half of a very, very thin body. I remember it had wide shoulders and what appeared to be in the moonlight to be long, swooshy haircut. Kind of like an emo haircut, I guess. It seemed very loose, long arms, an odd-shaped head and neck, and very pale in the moonlight. Both me and my friend were freaked out, and I knew it was not a scarecrow. The huge farms around here don't have those anyway, or a person. The stalks were not too much taller. Like I said, I always called it a Bigfoot, but I did not see any hair on this thing, except a swoopy mass on its head. I don't know if this is a good indicator of a crawler, but I saw some areas near me on the map and had to post about what I saw. My aunt recently shared a story with me after I talked to her about my recent interest in paranormal investigations. Preface: she lived in a home where the entrance led to the kitchen. Then you go straight through the kitchen, through the living room, turn right down the hallway into her bedroom where she sleeps at night on a waterbed. All relevant shortly. Her story goes like this. I heard what sounded like somebody opening the door to the house, which I found strange since everyone was home and in bed at the time. The sound was accompanied by a foul smell in the air, pungent and familiar, like dead flesh. She knows this because she's an RN, or for those that don't know, a registered nurse. She said as whoever came in walked closer to her room, the smell got worse, until finally they opened the door and crawled onto her bed. She states the smell intensified when it spoke to her. She could feel its breath on her face, and she refused to open her eyes. The thing's breath smelt of rotting flesh, and it stated to her, "If you keep going down this path, you will be mine." Then just like that, it was gone. She was struggling with alcoholism and a shopping addiction at the time. She said she wasn't drunk at this time. Now, I don't know why, but I don't think a demon would warn you to quit your habits. Any ideas on what this could have possibly been? Near my apartments, only about a block away, there's about 90 acres of wood trails and what I call the secret quarries. In my town, we have large quarries that are used as the swimming hole, basically. Because of the location of the area in my story, the quarries and woods near my house are relatively unknown and very much so secluded from people, but is common knowledge of those who live nearby. This last summer, I spent most of my days after working and tanning with my dog and dipping into those quarries. The woods there have always had a chaotic, uncomfortable energy, but as soon as you got off the path to the quarries, you'd immediately feel comfortable again, but never enough to actually swim full on. One day, I'm relaxing with my dog and I noticed that the woods went very, very quiet. Me being me, aka paranoid, the first thing I did was grab for my knife, because something was off. I tried rationalizing the silence and was telling myself somebody is probably just walking on the trails, and it spooked all the woodland creatures, no big deal. Keep in mind, my sandals are off and my feet are in the water. My dog hadn't reacted yet, and I figured I would be okay. The way the quarries are set up is that where it's comfortable and convenient for people to sit, you can see the whole quarry itself. The trails go around the entire quarry, so occasionally you can see people walking through the other side. To the left of where you sit, there's a pile of blackish, grayish rocks that sit roughly about 6 feet high. My eyes had started scanning the woods since the silence had started, and I had reached the rock pile. In the pile, I saw something, crouched behind it, watching myself and my dog. It had to have been as tall, if not taller, than the rock pile, and was leaving super close, almost to camouflage itself. Its head was large and round, its face flat, almost like an owl's, and its entire body was an off-white, almost gray color. It had what looked like huge round eyes, but the skin around its eyes were actually black, and its eyes were smaller than said circle and beady. Its arms, which were the only thing I could see other than its head, were very long. You'll find out why, and thin, and its hands were just huge and clawed. I couldn't see a nose, but its mouth was just a long slit. At that point, when I spotted it, my dog also perked up and was on high alert, stiff body, ears up, looking straight at the thing, so I knew I wasn't tripping. I did my best when I spotted it to give it to the side eye and not make it too obvious that I knew it was there. I slowly, in a controlled kind of way, started slipping my sandals on, and once they were on, I stood up to leave. As soon as I did this, the little alien thing gets on all fours and starts galloping down the trail like a dog would, where the trail around the quarries meets the main path. I said no, and started running, knife in hand, and I got past the mouth of the trail, and all of a sudden, my dog launches herself at something behind me. She's pretty protective, so I wasn't shocked, but holy hell, was I just trying to get away. I yelled her name, but I refused to turn around and look at the thing, so I pulled on the leash until she left it alone, and we both sprinted the rest of the way out of the woods until we hit the street. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe a weird cave animal, which would explain the paleness, but the general token I've given it is alien thing. I think it would very much so would have killed me had it got the chance, but I almost am convinced it was just curious and wanted to see what we were. Those woods would have had plenty of cult action, and I found concrete structures almost like pillars and things with pentagrams on them, so I don't go deep into the woods ever, but since that day, I've barely gone and won't go alone. Oh, and for clarity, the rock pile was on the trail surrounding the quarries towards the right half of the quarry, so it was in front of and across from me. I mistakenly said to the left. So the trail from the sitting area on the quarries connects to the main trail for a T or a Y. My dog was on a leash and I hit a sprint to the right onto the main trail, and I'm assuming the thing jumped out behind us at the same time. She lunged left. Her leash pulled because I was running the opposite direction, so she was forced to leave it alone, and it happened so fast that I didn't have time to look back because I'm running the entire time this is happening, so it was probably less than 2 to 3 seconds. June 2000. I had been up all night at a friend's house in the town of Tribby playing video games. I didn't want to sleep there, so I said goodbye and headed home. I knew my car was making a funny noise, but I thought surely I could get home. Well, I was driving down a long, dark stretch of highway with nothing but forest and a few sparse country houses. I was coming up to the top of a long hill when suddenly my car stops pulling forward. The engine revved, but no gears would engage. My CV joint just went out. I was hoping that wouldn't happen. Well, I had no way of getting it home, so I backed down the road, in neutral, and off onto a side road. I thought about staying and sleeping in the car, but something told me not to do that. I had an eerie feeling of being watched, So I grabbed my video game case and my machete that I had made from a lawnmower blade and started walking. I kept noticing the feeling of being watched, and it felt like I was being followed. I kept looking behind me and saw nothing, but when a car passed by, heading in the direction behind me, it illuminated the area with its headlights, and I saw something behind me in the ditch hunched down low. It was huge, and I could tell it looked animal, but had very humanoid features. It seemed to have arms, but its head was most definitely canine. Its head was very large, and its eyes glowed red when the lights hit them. Well, I've seen enough werewolf movies to know that this wasn't a good situation, so I started running. That probably wasn't the best choice because I know that predators like to chase things that run for them. When the car had passed, the creature had darted into the trees. I thought that was the best time to run, so I did. I ran for about a quarter mile and looked back but didn't see anything, so I kept walking. Well, I kept checking behind me and off to the side where the tree line was. I knew it was still out there and probably following me. And yeah, I was afraid, but I was also prepared to defend myself with my machete, if need be. I came up onto another hill and saw a farmhouse off in the distance to my left, down a long dirt driveway. The moon was almost full, and the area around the house was clear, so I could see a guy out there messing with his truck as I walked by. Then, he turned on a spotlight on his truck and spotted me with it. I kept walking because his property said no trespassing, and many out there wouldn't hesitate to unload on a strange trespasser. I knew it was close again, possibly closer now, and it was about to turn around and face it when another car came over the top of the hill and passed by me, going behind me again. I followed with my eyes and noticed this time it was a cop, so thinking quickly, I dropped my machete on the edge of the grass and waved. As he passed, his lights hit the ditch as well, and I saw the Dogman was very close, but it darted into the trees again when the light hit it. Thankfully, a moment later, the cop had stopped and turned around. He came back and asked me what I was doing out there, so I told him what had happened with my car. I didn't mention the Dogman though. He may have thought I was crazy, but I asked him for a ride home. He agreed after wanting to go check and make sure my car wasn't blocking the road. After we checked it, he agreed to take me home. I don't know what might have happened that night if he hadn't shown up, and it was the only time I was genuinely happy to ever see a police officer. August 15th, 2004. I'm probably the youngest person to come to you about this. I'm 16, I grew up here in Montana, and am very active in the outdoors. When I was 4 or 5, I lived with my parents in a small town next to the highway. Our house was right next to it, and my room faced a gravel road that went into the highway. It was summer, and we didn't have AC, so I would leave my window open at night so I could stay cool. One night, I woke up and noticed a silhouette standing outside my window. My eyes focused, and I saw that it had a furry outline and those frost blue eyes it was using to look up at me. I sat up in my bed, frightened, but I didn't feel the need to yell for my parents or anything. It just kind of stared at me. While looking at it, I saw that it had pointed ears with tufts of fur, like a lynx, and a muzzle like a German shepherd. It was fairly muscular, and was almost resting on my windowsill, like it was leaning up against it. We stared at each other for a good couple of minutes, then it smiled at me, like a dog does, even tilted its head. It then backed away from the window, walked across my yard to our chain link fence, and literally stepped over it. I got out of bed to watch this thing as it got down on all fours and ran down the road and across the highway. Listening, I heard it yip and bark while on the other side, which was a prairie, when a butte and then forest. It was almost like it was calling to others. Looking back on this, I feel like maybe it felt like it didn't pose a threat. Maybe it was just curious. Back then I was just a little kid. Now I'm a lot bigger. I'm 6'7" and weigh almost 200 pounds. So I'm thinking if I saw one of these again, I probably wouldn't get the same reaction. On April 4th of 2018, I came back home from work around midnight. Like most nights, I sat down on my back porch and lit a cigarette and relaxed. However, unlike most nights, I heard something new. I'm used to coyotes and my neighbor's dogs barking, but in this case, I heard something different. It sounded like a deep howl, but instead of the usual dog sound, it stayed as one tone, and it was octaves deeper. I heard it go from the backyard to backyard, and then the neighbor's dogs started to take notice. The dog's barking triggered one of my dogs to run out to the fence line, and she began to bark at something unseen, at least from my perspective. I got up and I told her, "Hey, come back in, girl, it's okay." She turned to me and she sat there utterly frozen in fear. It took a few minutes to break her out of this, and she bolted to the back of the door. I decided to poke my head out of the gate and look into the field behind the fence. By the tree line, I saw these amber-colored eyes standing about 5 feet above the ground. I decided to run in and took up my knife and ran out in the direction of the eyes. The whole time I walked that I heard the growls and the howls. However, though when I got close to where I initially saw these eyes, every sound stopped. You could literally hear a pin drop. Where I didn't see anything, I felt the presence of something watching me. After a few moments, I walked back to the porch and sat and had another smoke. It was then the howls started again. This time, though, they came from my neighbor's backyard. They have 2 shepherds, and I will never forget the sound. I first heard this guttural growl noise, unlike anything I've ever heard before. Then, one of the shepherds shrieked, and then I heard the other get slammed against a fence. One thing led to another, and I heard my neighbor fire off a round, and then I heard this thing trail off. The next encounter was just 3 nights ago. I heard the howl start up again, but this time, I heard it making its way through the tree line behind the back lot of my house. I heard the thumping of its feet, and the branches were snapping. Initially, my instincts kicked in to get to go cover, so I shut off the back porch light and allowed my eyes to get adjusted. There was enough light to clearly see the opening in the tree line that's about 2 of me wide and about 9.5 feet tall. I watched in the direction where the noises were coming from, and then all of a sudden, I see it. I see it stand up. I first saw the ears, tall and sharp like knives. I then saw its head, followed by its broad shoulders and long arms. It stood there watching me for what seemed like forever, until it turned and ducked down a little and took massive strides on 2 legs to walk off. It's because of this that I've been conducting an investigation on this thing. I learned there was an encounter in Firestone County, not very far from me. I hope to get reasonable evidence here soon. Before I share this story, I want to share the fact that this is my first post ever. It's a story that I've only shared with 2 other people in my life, whom I'm very close to because I sound crazy trying to explain what happened to me. I am from Roswell, New Mexico, born and raised. I grew up dealing with stuff and alien nonsense my entire life. The whole town is a tourist attraction for people who believe in aliens and believe there actually was a UFO crash that was here in the early 50s. Gift shops, cheap souvenirs, strange people galore. I'm a very logical thinker and have had many strange things happen to me in the past, but have always dealt with them in a "this can logically be explained" mindset since I can remember. But what I'm about to write is about something I cannot explain, and it also is something I'm hesitant to even think about anymore. I was camping with my cousin Cam, 17 at the time, same age as I was, his little brother Nick, who was 12, and my aunt and uncle. We were near Cloudcroft, New Mexico, up in the mountains. My uncle had just bought a new camper, and we decided to go camping with it for the weekend. The weather was beautiful, and me and my cousins decided to bring a tent to sleep in instead of the camper so we could be poopheads in peace. We set up our tent about 60 yards away from the camper and the fire that was right outside of it. Towards the end of the first night, and after a long day of exploring, we all decided to lay down for the night. We were not camping on an actual campsite. It was a spot that my uncle had found some years back, and it was the perfect spot to set up camp. At about 3 a.m., the fire was completely out. My cousins and I were still awake. Nick, being the youngest, was trying to stay up to be cool with us, but ended up falling asleep. It was only Cam and I awake now. We were just talking about hot chicks from school, brilliant ideas for things that need to be invented, like male birth control, and eventually, slowly started to fall asleep too. All of a sudden, we heard a blood-curdling scream from the distance, probably the same distance away the camper was, only in the opposite direction. Me and Cam both picked our heads up off the pillow and said almost simultaneously, "What was that?" It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a fox. It was big. The closest way I know how to describe it is a mixture of a banshee and a rabid peacock. Its voice was deep and echoed through the deep woods. It let out another blood-curdling shriek, and we both sat upright on our own blow-up mattress. Immediately after the screech, it started clicking, an odd, deep clicking sound coming from the back of its throat. It was loud enough to hear from the distance, too. We were scared, and neither of us had no idea what it could be. So we waited a second, both quiet as a mouse. It let out another scream, followed by a series of clicks, but it seemed to be closer now, maybe 10 yards closer. I looked at Cam, and he looked just as shocked as I was feeling. I was trying to convince myself it was a bird of some sort, or a mountain cat. Then, I heard it walking. It was walking on 2 feet, and I could distinctly hear it. It even sounded big, taking huge strides, cracking branches and leaves under its feet as it walked. It sounded like it was coming close to us. It screeched and clicked loudly again. I could tell it was about halfway to us now. Suddenly, another scream and clicks came from another direction, sounding just as close as the other creature. It sounded more aggressive, more angry and dominant. The first creature then let off a series of clicks too. Then it hit me. They were communicating. At this point, I was terrified, and so was Cam. I had an axe under my blow-up mattress, but I was afraid to get up and grab it. Then both of the creatures started walking towards us, both on 2 legs, not screaming or clicking, but it sounded like they were trying to be sneaky, sneak up on our tent. They were getting closer and closer. The first one screamed loudly, and I could tell it was roughly 15 yards away now, and so was the other one. After screaming, it started clicking again, and the other one clicked back at it. They were both walking closer and closer to the tent. I could hear them both stepping on limbs and leaves, but I could feel the ground thud with each step they took. I was panicking, frantically looking for my axe, while Cam was frantically trying to wake up his little brother. I couldn't find my axe anywhere. I realized I had left it near the campfire because we were using it to cut pieces of wood for the fire. Nick was not waking up, and they were getting closer and closer to the tent. Eventually, me and Cam froze. The second one had stopped about 10 feet away from the tent, but the first one was walking right up to the tent. As soon as it was right outside the tent, I yelled as loud as I could out of pure fear, "Get away from here! Leave us alone!" It stopped. It was right outside. I could almost see it through the tent. It was huge, tall enough to lean over and look through the top of the tent if it wanted to. I could tell it was slim, and the creature was heavy because of how tall it was. I could feel its energy, and it was very negative. I felt the vibes of the universe, and they were telling me that whatever these things were, they were not just there to say hi or steal our hot dogs. I was frozen. They were right outside, and the moon was covered by clouds, so moonlight was no longer shining anywhere. I couldn't even hear it breathing. It was silent. The second one clicked from behind us, still 10 feet away or so from the tent. The first one didn't move. It didn't make a single sound, and it was probably a foot away from the tent. My heart was beating so hard that I thought I was going to pass out. All of a sudden, it took 2 huge steps back, and the second one let out a scream so loud it hurt my ears. I immediately burst into tears. The second creature took off into the woods, pounding the ground underneath it, running on 2 legs faster than ever. The first one apparently turned around and walked away back into the deep woods. I waited until I completely heard its footsteps disappear, until I unzipped the tent, threw little Nick over my shoulder, and we booked it towards the camper. We got inside and woke up my aunt and uncle. They had no idea what was going on and urged us to take our butts to bed. We slept in the camper the next 2 nights, and I didn't leave the campsite for the rest of the trip. I don't know what we encountered that night, but all I know is that it was not of this kind. It was not human, not bear, not a 4-legged animal, and it definitely was not a rabid peacock. It has scared me ever since, and its energy and screams still haunt me to this day. While some may think it was a Bigfoot or a skinwalker, I think it was something more evil, like a demon. Hi folks, I do not want my name out there on the internet because it never goes away. Anyway, a few years ago I decided to contact the BFRO about having Yetis on my place. I call them Yeti because they have 3 toes instead of 5. I always knew we had more than one cryptid on the place. I live on a river and have about 18 acres of land in total. The Dogman have been sighted off Lime Road, which also borders my river. I am from Pueblo, Colorado, and I live on the St. Charles River, which dumps into the Arkansas River. My researchers had me put out cams to see if I could catch any Bigfoot activity. I did, and over the years have caught other strange creatures on cam. I call them hybrids. My encounter started when I was only 8 years old in 1969, when a huge Bigfoot stood up in the front of my dad's Alley's Charmer's tractor, and it has continued to this day, and other creatures as well. I have a pic of the Dogman that I caught in the river. It takes up a span of 4 feet wide. He has huge shoulders and is staring directly at the camera across from it. Yes, it is black, has ears that tip in towards themselves, and scars on its face, and it appears he is not too happy about having his picture taken. I felt very vindicated when I got that pic and I blew it up in Word so I could get a good look at the creature. Quite ugly to say the least. It is a daylight pic, right about when the sun is setting. Good pic anyway. In the pic he is not standing but buffed out squatting, looking at the camera. That's not all guys, I keep my big dogs in at night because I don't want them killed. I have an older blue heeler and an Irish wolfhound mix. He's not as big as an Irish wolfhound, but nonetheless is fast and aggressive. I almost lost him fall. He was 3 at the time. I came home and he wasn't there to greet me, and I found him pretty beat up with a 6-inch slice at his groin, which almost cut into his venal artery. He had no bite marks at all, but he was beat all over his body, like something pulverized him. He was so swollen that you could push in on the swelling like you were pushing in on a semi-inflated balloon. I called my pasture neighbor, who indeed said there was a fight in the river at about 9 a.m. She said it sounded horrible and heard a dog screaming. Well, I said it was my dog. It changed my dog's personality. He is more cautious, skittish, and when these creatures are around, will not leave my side, nor will he venture to the river. Irish wolfhounds are ear, sight, and smell dogs, and when he stands on his hind leg or raises his head, smelling the air, turns around and comes back to me, something is afoot in the river. I have had many instances with these creatures on my place, and I have lost a few good dogs to that river and what runs it. My researchers are mostly into Bigfoot and do not come around much anymore. Matter of fact, one moved away to another part of Colorado. They are cryptologists. Gentlemen, be very careful with going into the woods with these things. I can prove these creatures and others are not what we know as normal animals. Dogmen are very hard to kill, as well as Bigfoot, or as well as the other creatures on my place. I hope you carry a very large caliber weapon when out humping it in the woods. I have a picture of a hybrid that kind of has like an ape-like face. Huge shoulders, not much body, and African lion feet. You can see 4 shadows in that picture, and it's quite a picture. Broad daylight, bright morning, and when I sent it to my researchers, they added some color to the picture to see the creature better and sent it back to me. This is why I say Dogman, Bigfoot, and other cryptids are out there, giants of old. March of 2017. It was 2:30 a.m. and another night of not being able to sleep due to back pain. I was lying on my side, reading, when my very close by neighbor's motion detector light turned on. This happens from time to time, and when it turns on, it lights up the entire sides of my house. We have lived here an entire 9 years, and I have never once seen anything walk past my bedroom window at night. Since I was facing my large bedroom window, the very bright motion detector light going off caught my attention. I looked up and saw the side silhouette of a dogman. I said, "Holy crap!" It was walking past my bedroom window. I saw it from mid-shoulders up. The shoulders were huge and its head was huge. It had pointed ears like a German shepherd dog and a longer snout. Its mouth was slightly open as I saw a large tongue that seemed to be lolling to the side of its mouth. When I saw this creature and spoke those words, I swear that thing slowed down and smirked and then kept going. That's all I saw that night. Last week, though, while in my bedroom again, I heard something huge land on the ground behind my bedroom wall. That wall has no windows. I heard deep, kind of raspy breathing. I started praying, pleading the blood of Jesus over my house, grounds around it and all. I do this most nights, but sometimes I forget. I'm awake most nights until 3 a.m. or later due to having severe spinal issues as well as fibromyalgia. We live in a lovely manufactured home community. There are lots of trees around here, and it's very close to canals, large open fields, and woods. I know this is what I saw, but the fact that I saw that has left me amazed. Why is that, when so many are also seeing them? I guess I just thought that since I am in the house most of the time, due to my health, I would never see them. The space between my neighbor's house and ours is roughly 10 feet. My husband went outside weeks later, once I got the courage to tell him that this happened, and measured the area by the window. That dogman had to be at least 8 feet tall. What concerns me greatly is that no one in the police department or government will alert people to their existence. People are walking around feeling a false sense of security. I know I did. I won't even try to walk outside anymore, and yes, I have cautioned my neighbors, the ones with the security light. I can't think of any other details right now, but it's important for you to know that several years ago, a homeless woman was camping out down by the river here in Albany. She was found dead, and her tent was torn up. I believe the police report in the newspaper said she was torn up as well, but I honestly can't remember any of the details. To the best of my knowledge, no one was ever caught for that crime. This is a sleepy town, just over 50,000 people. We no longer get the newspaper, so I have no idea if this happened again. I do know that a couple was down by that same area and saw a dogman. It really frightened them badly. I heard about that on another YouTube channel. I just want people to be aware so they don't go out at night anymore, especially near the river. But then again, we're not near a river, and I saw one in the middle of the night. Thank you for reading this report and for doing all that you do to make people aware of what is really going on out there. In 1987, I was 16. My parents and I lived in a log house, which was 3 stories, in U.S.A, on top of a mountain. My room was in the basement. It was like my own little apartment. I kept my window open during summer to catch the cool breeze at nighttime. One night, I was trying to go to sleep and heard in the distance a loud howling, moaning, screaming sound. Really hard to describe. You would expect bears, bobcats, and your occasional warthog around those parts of the woods, but I had never heard the sound before. It made me literally sick to my stomach. I lay there in silence with my Great Dane, who was also startled by the sound. About 5 minutes later, I heard heavy steps outside my window. I then smelt something horrific and heard footsteps on the deck. I felt that whatever it was looking through my window at that point. My dog was pretty much under the covers, hiding with me. Whatever it was seemed to pace back and forth in front of my window for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then it paced off. Later, I heard that same wrenching howl, moan, scream thingy. At that point, I scurried and closed my window. Needless to say, I had trouble sleeping and did not ever want to sleep with my window open. I have continuously had nightmares about Bigfoot, even to this day. I am now 33 years old. At the time that I encountered this creature, I was 13. I will write it as it happened. Me and my family lived in a rural community on the outskirts of Riverdale, Georgia. Behind our house, there was many acres of woods. At that time, that area belonged to a man named Mr. Jackson. There was a huge lake there also. It was called Jackson's Lake. Mr. Jackson was a cattle farmer. His cattle were on the other side of the lake. There were many trails in those woods, and me and my friend Daniel played in them many, many times. It was very easy to lose yourself out there all day long. My encounter happened when I walked through those woods to a trailer park that was called Chateau Manor. The trailer park still exists today, but is under a different name. I went to visit a friend, and I started to notice that it was getting late, and my father had told me that he did not want me in those woods after dark. This struck me and my mother as strange, because we would always be in the woods. My mom would even go in the woods to pick blackberries, actually. At any rate, I decided to obey my father, as I did not want to hear his mouth. I walked to the back of the trailer park, and there you have to cross a big ravine. It's like 10 to 15 feet down, and then up again. It was covered in thick vegetation and that Georgia red clay. Down in the ravine was a creek, so you would get a little scuffed up. After I crossed that, I went up a trail that went up by a hill by the lake, and that curved around and led back to my house. After passing the lake and turning the curve, I encountered my father. He said, "What are you doing out here?" I said I was just coming back from Pam's house. He said, "Well, hurry up and get home." I left him standing there and started for home. I turned back to see what he was doing, and he was walking toward the lake. I just kept walking toward my house, when on my right side, I heard rustling in the foliage beside me. The foliage was mostly dense, tall pine trees with all kinds of honeysuckles and blackberry bramble. That was actually the place where me and my mother would go and pick blackberries. I turned and looked, and I saw this creature. This thing was massive. I could see him. He was only a few feet away from me. He stood parallel to me. I was heading north to my house. He too was face north. I was on a heavily walked clear trail, whereas he was in the shrubs. These little pine trees were taller than him. He was at least 7 to 8 feet tall. His arms were huge, like the size of thighs. They were very long. His chest was massive as well. This was no skinny creature. I looked at him. He looked at me. And off, I went running up the trail. I was so scared. When I started to run, he did too. He ran right beside me in the shrubs. I would look to my right and see him, and the thing would make a loud sound. It's like he would exhale and let out a very deep grunt or roar. I kept running, and he kept running beside me in the shrubs. This thing was completely hairy, and its face was dark, but I could tell it was human-like, because its head was like that of a human head, but hair all over, but not on the face. When I had reached the part of the trail that forked off into an open field of tall grass, wheat-like stuff, that is where he stopped. He would not come out of the shrubbery. I looked back and seen him crouching there, staring at me as I ran, and he just was there in the shrubbery. When I made it home, I ran in the house shaking like a leaf, and my mom was making supper. I told her what had happened and what I had seen, and she went to look out the dining glass window. It was a sliding glass window, and she said she didn't see anything. She asked where my father was, and I told her. Then sat down with me at the dining room table and told me that was the reason that he did not want me in those woods. She said that he had told her that he had hemmed it up in a tree one night, and that he just stood there in front of it and screamed at it, and it wouldn't come out of the tree. I never told anyone other than my mother and Daniel, and now my 4 boys, about that. But there was something in those woods, and me and my father weren't the only ones that knew it. One day, I was watching TV after school, and this was before any of this had happened, and my father come in and told me to come and help him. I said, why? Me and my father do not get along very well. He said because Benji, our dog, had got caught in a bear trap on the other side of the lake. So I said, what? And he said yes. So we went and tried to free Benji, and my father had took a machete. He said he could not open the trap, so he was going to cut his foot off. So I screamed no, and I pulled the trap with all my might, and my father got Benji out. Now why had somebody set a bear trap in the woods? There are no bears in Georgia. The biggest animal besides that thing I had seen were deers and cows. And the cows were on the other side of the lake. They could not come across one side because of the trees, and the other side because of a big steel fence. And other times before I had ever encountered this being, me and my family would go walking in the woods, and sometimes we would cross the steel gate over to Mr. Jackson's land and trek about a mile to a very sandy, clear creek. That was the side where the cows were. On many different occasions, we would come upon a cow lying on the ground dead with its whole stomach torn out. That was very weird to me, but because I was young and didn't know much more, since my parents didn't say much, I never really put 2 and 2 together until my later 20s. There was something in those woods, but it's probably long gone by now. There are houses all around that lake, and Mr. Jackson no longer lives in this house. The creek where these things happened is called Camp Creek. The lake was called Jackson's Lake. It was private to him. Although me and Daniel would always play around the woods and the lake. The name of the street was and is Lyle Drive, the town Riverdale, Georgia. I will never forget when that creature chased me, but when I got to that opening, I knew that he didn't want to hurt me. Because I know by his massive size and that massive sound that he could have just ripped me apart had he wanted to. Needless to say, I didn't want to go to those woods much after that. You are the first people that I have ever told besides my mom and my friends and my kid. Okay, so I'm 15. I know a bit young to be credible, but I have seen some things. I lived most of my life to the age of 14 in Michigan. I lived in the St. Joe area, if anyone is familiar with that area. Anyway, my grandparents lived in the northern areas of Michigan, and we would regularly drive the 4 to 5 hour drive and go visit them either on the way to our lake house, which was a little farther north, or just to see them. They lived in the middle of nowhere, 25 minutes to town sort of thing. Both of their neighbors were a mile in each direction, and their property is huge. They live in a small trailer in the middle of the property, and they have 2 pastures to each side of the property, and in the back they had miles of trails that would take you through the woods. My grandfather usually used this for hunting. I was hitting golf balls from the front of our house into the pasture. I hit all my balls and went to go collect them in the pasture. I opened the gate and shut it behind me so none of the dogs could get through, and I walked around picking up balls. A couple of them went farther than normal, so I had to walk back behind the pasture area and into the wooded area. As I was walking, I could hear leaves being crushed, but they were like a little off from my steps. I kept hearing this weird noise come from behind me, kind of like a watery sound, I guess. It was like someone just got out of the shower and they were dripping wet. But this noise kept stopping and starting, so I just thought it was the wind blowing water out of the trees. I found my last ball and turned around to start walking back, and I saw something tallish move behind a tree. I could tell it was taller than me, but didn't really know what it was. Being from Michigan, we've got our fair share of scary animals that would love to bite into your meaty flesh, but this was definitely not a wolf and could not have been a bear. I would have smelt it. so I kind of stood there frozen, just looking at the tree and bushes the thing was near. After a while, the thing started to creep out. It crawled out on its hands and legs. First, I saw its long skinny arms, which followed by its head. It looked up and around and finally looked at me. It crawled the rest of the way out, and I could see the thing whole. It had skinny arms like it hadn't eaten in a while. Dark-looking skin that had a shine to it like it was slimy. Its body was just a mass of flesh. It didn't look to have a stomach or chest. It was just kind of twisted up and misformed. Its legs were just as long and messed up looking as its arms, and both of the thing's feet and hands were elongated. Not massively or anything, but you could tell it was longer than your average foot or hand. Its head was the part I have a really hard time pinpointing down. It had eyes, no hair, and a long mouth that just wouldn't open. The nose was just two holes, and it had a very long, exaggerated chin, but it kind of looked normal in a way. It stared at me, and without opening its mouth, it made the sounds I had been hearing, which seemed to be made by its nose, and the holes flared. It started to walk around. Not at me, but just around where it was. Then it stood up on two legs. It was probably about 6.5 feet tall, but the appearance made it look a lot scarier. The thing moved its neck even in an unnatural way, and then looked at me. It was maybe 25 yards away, way too close for comfort, but I was not about to move and have this creature charge at me. All of a sudden, it just bolts right at me. I opened my eyes wide and just prepare, but it ran right by me and through the woods. I turned around and sure enough, it just kept running. Sometimes on all fours, sometimes on two legs. Its run both was unnatural. Its body contorted and just looked so off. I ran out of the pasture and shut the gate behind me again. I didn't tell my grandparents right away, but a couple of months later, I did. This was in the summer of 2018. I didn't tell them till about fall of the same year. My grandfather pulled me aside after I told him and asked me what it looked like exactly. I told him, and he said I've seen it before out on the trails. He didn't say any more, just for me to not be worried. I haven't really told anyone, but my family and close friends about this, but I guess that has changed now. This really messed me up for a while. The scary thing is too, I've seen it after, several times actually, in different places. Never at my home, but anywhere up north, even at a lake cabin an hour away from my grandparents. This one was by far the scariest though. I know it is not a skinwalker. At least it shouldn't be. I don't know, but does anyone have any possible explanation? Please help me figure this out. This happened about a month ago, but I shared this video on Facebook that had pictures of skinwalkers and likewise creatures and had some funny music in the background. A friend of mine, I'll call him T, commented about how creepy they are and that he's never seen one but has read a bit about them. I told him about my experiences with some I've seen around the area, and he goes, "Don't tell me that." He lives not even 4 minutes away from me, and we laughed it off. Later that night, he ended up having a little get-together at his place with all of our friends, so I decided to join. After a couple of hours, some of our friends left, so there were less of us. Things were more quiet and calm. Eventually, we started talking about the video, and I went into more details of experiences I had, and some that my brother had told me about as well. We started to get a little creeped out, so we just changed the subject. An hour goes by, and I decide to go outside in his backyard to smoke. I had been outside a few times that night for a smoke break, but never by myself. This time, no one came with me, and thinking nothing of it, I just casually sat out there on the porch, playing on my phone. All of a sudden, I hear a loud bang sound. He had neighbors behind his house and on both sides, so I looked up at the fence that separated his yard from his neighbors. They lived behind him on a hill, so his backyard was kind of steep, and there were lots of bushes. It was hard to see anything but the noise I heard seemed to have come from that way, so I looked up. I noticed one of the big bushes shaking around, which froze me in my chair. I thought, maybe it's an animal. But then it came out, crawling on all fours. Human-looking, but animalistic in a weird way. Its legs were long, and its skin was pale. It looked like a mix of a dog and an extremely anorexic person. It turned its head straight towards me and looked me dead in my face. I said out loud, "Nope," and put out my cigarette and ran straight for the back door. When I got inside, I locked it, and everyone looked at me like, "What's wrong with you?" I had to tell them. The rest of the night, none of us went outside. If anyone smoked, we just stayed inside his garage. I was completely sober, and everyone that knew me could tell I was worried, so they believed me. We talked about how odd it was that exact day we had just been talking about skinwalkers, and then I happened to see one. But we all brushed it off, not wanting to kill the good mood. When I got home, I thought maybe I had imagined it, but it didn't really happen. A couple of days later, T hosted another get-together, and when we all got comfortable, he proceeds to tell us that the next day he went outside to see if he can find any evidence of the skinwalker, or whatever creature it was, being there, and he confirmed that one of the boards of the wooden fence above the exact bush I saw it come out of was busted. Broken, like an animal or something had knocked it out. He said he'd been up there multiple times the past few days before that night, doing yard work, and that it was never busted before, and that the neighbors on the other side don't own any dogs. Now, anytime T has people over, he never lets anyone go outside by themselves. I really think because I'm into witchcraft and I'm familiar with these beings, they like to show themselves to me. Because it's so odd that it only came out when I was out there alone, and it looked right at me. In northern Idaho, in Hoodoo Valley. Last winter, right after the first snow, my mother and I were driving home from a nearby town. You have to cross the train tracks twice to get to my house. After the second crossing is our neighborhood that all the kids of craziness hang out and talk about signs about giants in the woods and government cover-ups. The hoodoo legend of the howler. We've always thought these people were talking about Sasquatch. We are members of the BFRO, but we never guessed a chance for Dogman. We were passing the Looney House, and it was around 2200 hours, with clear vision. There's a bullpine tree line to my right and a hillside to my left, and my property straight up on the top of the hill. My brights were on, and I remember scanning the tree line as we're passing. At about 12 feet up were two red reflected eyes, surrounded by a black mass with shoulders, no neck, and impronounced ears. My shock caused me to ditch the front, not paying attention to the road. We were high-centered for about 5 minutes. I stepped out to lock my hubs, and I remember that overwhelming feeling of being watched, which hurried my project. When I got back in the car, the feeling didn't go away. I quickly got out of the ditch and sped up the hill to the house. My mother was asking me why I was so worried, which she later found out why. About midnight, Mom was woken up by the most guttural howling you can imagine. Mom yelled at me through the house if I was awake, and I had already had my window cracked and listening to the sounds that we still hear every now and then. I then located Mr. Vic, who runs Dogman Encounters on the East Coast. He gave me the best info he could, which was extremely helpful. I then armed myself with an AR-15, .45 revolver, and a .380. It was the best I had at the time. I figured a guy on the phone might be full of it, and the only way to get the truth is to find it yourself. I tracked through the snow to the location I seen the eyes in the exact tree. There were no tracks in the snow. I thought I was just seeing things and got all worked up over nothing. But then, I looked up. Around 13 to 15 feet up in a tree, and about 7 feet up as well, were claw marks dug into the tree. I started looking for other trees, and sure enough, there was a trail of claw marks from tree to tree. Eventually, the mystery trail came to an end and gave into another shocking trail. Large enough to dwarf a lion print, were the largest dog prints I have ever seen. The trail seemed to step over large brush piles and bushes. Eventually, It led to the quad trail that follows the lower part of my property and Hoodoo Lake. What I saw next still lies there. A deer carcass with no head, no hindquarters, and no vital organs. On closer examination, the neck bone was crumbled and shattered, surrounded by torn flesh. Both legs were broken with no bite marks, and the ribs had been separated in a pattern that indicated hyperextension. There is a lot of scuffle in the snow from coyotes, but I've never seen coyotes leave the breast meat and backstraps. What concerned me even more was I found a leg wedged in the fork of a thin pine about 12 feet off the ground. This tree couldn't support a bobcat. I've never gone back in the woods behind my house without being armed since. My neighbors now think I'm the crazy one. I dress in full combat gear when I set trail cams. I guess I'm the weird one now, but I will tell you this. There is something in the woods that has the rancher across the street thinking a grizzly attacked his cows in November. Every neighbor hears the howls. I asked my landlord at the bar if he had seen or heard anything while he was living here, and his face just went white as a ghost. I haven't had a sighting since, but I did have an ice ball thrown at my car. There's no kids in the neighborhood. On October 7th, 2009, at about 11:30 p.m., my wife and I were returning to Florida from a trip to Northern Carolina, where we were driving south on US 441 in an unpopulated area at about 65 miles an hour. We were about halfway between Homerville and Fargo, which is slightly west of the Okefenokee Swamp. It was very dark with a very scant traffic around. We were the only car in sight. There were no other lights visible anywhere and no houses or businesses anywhere around. My wife had turned on the map light because we were getting low on gas and we needed to check the distance to the nearest probable area for gas. She was looking down at the map and didn't see it, but sure, she smelt it. Years before, we had been camping in the swamp and were aware of the wildlife diversity. I have hunting, camping, and Brazilian jungle experiences, and I am not easily frightened, but this shook me up. It was an instinctive reaction, similar to when you have a surprise encounter with a poisonous snake. I saw a very dark brown, black, constant colored tall humanoid figure standing on the left shoulder of the road, quarter facing toward the road and toward the direction of our travel. The figure was standing still, very vertically erect with both arms loosely down at its sides. I couldn't see any facial features or individual features of hands or feet. I estimate it to be about 7 feet tall and weigh about 200 and 300 pounds. It was lanky, rather than stocky, and was not crouching forward, but standing very vertical. The smell coming into the car vent was very powerful and was a combination of sewer-like and a strong, musky animal odor. There was an animal roadkill a few yards down the highway that was fresh, so that wouldn't account for the foul odor. We conjectured that the creature had smelt the roadkill and came out of the woods to investigate. The hair on the head was long and stringy, but the rest of the body hair seemed only 2 or 3 inches long and lay down rather than sticking out in a fuzzy fashion. The thing that struck me was that I couldn't see any facial features or varied colors around the handed areas. We thought about turning around to reinvestigate, but in the middle of the night, I frankly didn't think it was prudent. We proceeded to the next major intersection to buy gas, and I asked the station employees if anyone else had mentioned something unusual or if there were any kind of unusual wildlife sightings in the area. They answered no. That was the end of our incident. All but one of the sketches I have ever seen of a creature anything like this showed a more stocky, crouching like ape. What I saw was a tall, lanky humanoid creature that looked almost helmeted because of the way the head hair fell straight down, similar to a woman with long straight hair. I could see no neck. I don't know what I saw, but I will never stop my car at night anywhere in that area again. This is a reoccurring situation. I have seen prints that looked like giant bare feet in the dirt. It was in the wintertime, and I know there would be no one walking up the side of a mountain barefoot in those kinds of temperatures. I noticed I have found them along service roads and along trails by power lines. I suspect they are found there for the same reason I am there: deer hunting. There are also 3 lakes and multiple creeks in the same area. I was hunting with my wife, and I showed her prints, and she wanted to leave real quick. I have seen an actual animal when I was in my teens, but I lived in Ohio then. People say that I'm crazy, but I know these animals are real. The closest thing that I can compare them to are giant orangutans. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I know the woods and every animal that lives there. I know what these are and that they are real. I live in Rome, Georgia, and where I find these tracks are near to where I live, but I don't tell anyone because of fear of some yahoo would try to hunt them. It was around 11 p.m., December 31st, 2006. I had just got back from a 9-hour drive from Florida, and I was sitting on the couch with my uncle watching the end of the Bears-Packers game. My son's mother called, and I was talking to her when I heard a sound at the window. The only way to describe it is a hooting sound, something like a monkey. Since the lights were on in the house, I couldn't see outside, so I looked over to my uncle to see if he was messing with me. He was looking out the window and thought I made the noise. Then he jumped up and said, "Did you see that?" I looked over to the window and saw the bush moving outside. He grabbed one of his guns, and we were planning on shooting at midnight, and ran outside. Once he got outside, he could see more movement at the end of the house, and I heard a grunting noise near my sister's window. It sounded like it came from a big animal. Sounded something like, His dog Max heard my uncle yelling, "Who's there?" and ran around to the front where he was. As soon as Max got there, he stopped barking and whimpered as he backed up to my uncle. The dog wouldn't get near the side of the house though. We didn't hear or see anything for a while, so we went back inside. When we came back out at midnight, we heard some noises, but they were far off. Except for that, we didn't hear anything else that entire night. On our way home to Rockmart, Georgia, from Birmingham, Alabama, we were following the directions the GPS gave for the distance. This brought us to Highway 120 and Vincent Mountain Road. We had just made that turn and gone 1.5 miles when my husband and myself saw a large figure standing there in the tree line. There was illumination coming from the right side of the road from an additional light source other than our car headlights. This enabled us to clearly see this figure that was on the left side of the road with one arm straight down and the other arm slightly moving. I believe that arm movement is what caught our attention, making us both look to our left, clearly allowing us both to view this creature. It was covered in reddish-brown fur from head to toe, with a face I can only describe as ape-like. It appeared to be over 7 feet tall. He or she seemed to be getting ready to cross the road. After about 15 seconds had passed, he and I both screamed out, "Did you just see what I saw?" I have never been a believer in the legend of Bigfoot, but I know what I saw tonight, and I am floored. I have never written to any site such as this about anything in my life, and I certainly didn't think I would start at 56 years old. I've recently decided to move from my sister's home, and I was telling my older brother about a few sightings that me and my sisters have been having over the last year or so. These were on multiple occasions and at random times of morning and night. He told me to look it up online since he's crazy into supernatural things, and he told me it might be a Dogman. I don't know what that is exactly, but these posts I've seen here are more accurately describing the creature we've been seeing, and I decided to tell you about my own similar experiences. The first time I saw it, I was looking out of the front door. I always check outside before I take the dogs out because we live in a kind of town-home community, and people have all types of vicious dogs unleashed, and I never want to have an encounter with any of them. Our front door is all frosted, except the center, which is the only part you can see out of, and it's shaped like a rose. I took a look outside and caught sight of a doggish-shaped kind of creature, but without my glasses on, I just thought it was a dog. And to be sure of this, ta-da, I put my glasses on and cracked the door to get a better look. The only way I can ever describe this creature to anyone is that it was very spiny and it was hunched on all fours. It looked exactly like a human pretending to be a dog from behind, like it walked kind of funny on its legs. I slammed the door and turned around to yell for my sister's attention so she could also see what I was seeing. But when I looked back outside, it was gone. Vanished like it was never even there. And this area is heavily wooded across from our townhouse, so I figured maybe it was a dog and I was just super sleepy and hallucinated everything about it. This is Georgia. I've lived here my whole life, and the weirdest thing I've seen was a drunk man trying to ride a dog like a horse. I talked to my eldest sister the next day about it, and her reaction was, "Yeah, what the heck is that thing anyway? I've been seeing it a few times when I pull in from work. The other night my headlights flashed on it, and it ran into the woods." She later called it a creepy white dog, but admitted that she'll sit and wait in the car for a bit before coming in, just to make sure that it's gone. She even called me once and asked me to unlock the door so she can make a run for it. Some of our relatives have said that it's just a dog and we shouldn't worry about it. Now, you guys don't have to do this, but if you were to get down on all fours, raise your back a little bit, and walk across the floor just like that. That's what it was doing when I saw it. Every step it took, it looked, well, like a human pretending to be a dog. It was just so white though, and pale. We've never seen its face though. I'm a little too scared to wonder what it looks like.